Hey everyone, this is Corner once again, back with another video for Monster Hunter World Iceborne. So in today's video, we are going to be continuing the Monster Talk series where I talk about the different monsters that have arrived in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. In my previous episode of Monster Talks, I spoke about the subspecies, the Nightshade Paolumu. Now if you would like to check out that previous episode, I'll go ahead and put a link down in the description below of each and every single episodes so you can go ahead and watch them at your own leisure. So, in today's video, we are going to be continuing the Monster Talk series by talking about the next monster that we get introduced to in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, as well as the next subspecies that we get introduced to towards the series, and that is none other than the Coral Pukei Pukei. The Coral Pukei Pukei is a subspecies of the original Pukei Pukei that we got from the base game. However, being a subspecies, for the most part, this monster feels completely different to its original version. In fact, when I fought this monster for the very first time, this was a monster that felt so different that it actually didn't feel like I was fighting a Pukei Pukei. Yes, it did have the Pukei Pukei aesthetics to it, but it was such a different fight that it didn't feel like a subspecies of the original monster. It felt like its own independent monster. The first two subspecies that we get introduced to in Monster Hunter World Iceborne do feel a little bit like their original counterparts, especially when it comes to the Nightshade Paolumu because it maintains a lot of the original Paolumu's attack patterns. So for the most part, those two monsters do feel like their original version. But when it comes to the Coral Pukei Pukei, it's such a completely different experience that what you know from the original monster, just throw it out the window because you won't need any of that information when it comes to fighting this particular subspecies. Now let's find out what makes the Coral Pukei Pukei so different in comparison to that of its original version. First off, let's talk about its appearance. As a subspecies of the Pukei Pukei, the Coral Pukei Pukei maintains a lot of the aesthetics and anatomy of the original version. In fact, there's no changes to the anatomy whatsoever. The only big change that has happened to the original monster when it comes to the subspecies is that the color has been changed. So, much like that of any other subspecies, the coloration is the biggest difference between the original version and the subspecies. Now, what Capcom have done to the coloration of the monster is really interesting, and I really like it for that matter, because of the fact that the original Pukei Pukei kind of has this chameleon-like face to it, especially with the eyes. Capcom themselves continued to maintain that chameleon-like aesthetic to the monster when they did the Coral Pukei Pukei as well. And they did this by making it so that the monster itself blends into the environment that it's in. This means that the original Pukei Pukei itself, the coloration that it has, isn't just a coincidence that it matches the ancient forest. Capcom themselves actually made it so that the coloration of the original Pukei Pukei, so the predominantly green coloration supported by a number of orange, purple, and blue colorations across its body, this was made to match the ancient forest. The predominantly green coloration is to support the forestation itself, and the smaller details such as the orange coloration, the purple, the blue, these are all meant to represent the flora and endemic life in the ancient forest. The Coral Pukei Pukei is exactly the same, but this time the coloration is based on the locale it's in, which is the Coral Highlands. So the body of the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is predominantly reddish pink, which is similar to the corals in the Coral Highlands. So a lot of the body of the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is to match and blend in with the corals within the Coral Highland. This is then supported by a number of vibrant colors of orange, green, yellow, and red. These are all to match the plants and endemic life within the Coral Highlands again. So as you can see, Capcom themselves have really kept that chameleon-like feeling for this particular monster, despite the fact that this is one of those monsters that I would consider to be a little bit on the weaker side when it comes to the original version. So as you can see, Capcom themselves are really making it so that not only is this a monster that blends in within the locale it's in, it will also change its coloration based on the locale it's in. So not only will a Pukei Pukei take on the coloration of the general aesthetic of the locale itself, it will also try to match some of the colorations of the other things within that locale. So the endemic life and the flora, for example, like with the original Pukei Pukei and the Coral Pukei Pukei itself. So overall, I like what Capcom have done with this. Now, there is one monster within the Monster Hunter series that did have a chameleon-like theme to it, which is the Elder Dragon Chameleos. However, Capcom themselves didn't exactly make it so that the Chameleos changes color depending on the locale it's in. Instead, the Chameleos itself actually genuinely turns invisible because it's an Elder Dragon, therefore it has that supernatural ability to turn invisible. So, for the most part, that's what they did with that Elder Dragon, and I'm really hoping they bring that into Monster Hunter World Iceborne at some point. I doubt it's gonna happen personally, but it would be nice to actually see that monster in Monster Hunter World Iceborne. But overall, that's the kind of feeling that I get when it comes to the Coral Pukei Pukei and the Pukei Pukei itself. These are monsters that are basically chameleon-like because they tend to blend in within their environments, especially when it comes to the coloration and pigmentation of their body. Now then, moving on from the appearance of the Coral Pukei Pukei itself, let's talk about the way this monster behaves. First and foremost, when it comes to the initial interaction with this monster is actually fairly docile in comparison to its standard counterpart. The standard counterpart itself is actually very aggressive when you think about it, because you get that eye icon that indicates aggression when you're in front of the monster itself, and if you don't move away from its line of sight, eventually that monster will start to attack you. The Coral Pukei Pukei, however, it doesn't have that. It doesn't even get the eye icon when you're in front of it. For the most part, this monster is very chill. You just get to hang out with it, chillax with it, and it just minds its own business. So this is one of those monsters that gets misrepresented yet again in the introductory cutscene, because in the cutscene, it's automatically aggressive. However, upon first interaction in something like an optional mission or even an investigation or something like that, then this monster is actually fairly friendly. So you just basically chillax with it for the most part, as long as you don't provoke it yourself by attacking it in any way, shape, or form, or there is no other large monsters in the area that might provoke it. So overall, it's a very friendly monster upon first interaction. Now, when it comes to the combat aggression of this monster, then this monster has a higher aggression in comparison to its standard counterpart, and rightly so. Now, because of the fact that this monster has so many new movesets in comparison to its standard counterpart, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on, the combat aggression of this monster is much higher than that of the original Pukei Pukei. The Coral Pukei Pukei itself will start to attack you with many different combinations of attacks that it can use in order to try and take you down. Now, this is something that a lot of the subspecies share. They all have heightened combat aggression. So something like the Azurathalos, for example, again, it has heightened combat aggression, so it starts to attack you with different combinations of attacks, and the Coral Pukei Pukei is no different in that. Now, having said that, because it's lower on the food chain, the higher combat aggression of this particular monster is not as high as something like the Azurathalos, for example. It's still quite high in comparison to the original Pukei Pukei, but is not as high as those other monsters on top of the food chain. So overall, it's a heightened aggression with this particular monster, but it's not super high that it can feel like a tier 2 monster, for example, or tier 3, which is Elder Dragon level aggression, for example. So overall, it's an aggressive monster, but it's no threat level 2 or level 3 monster. Now then, shifting from the way this monster behaves, let's talk about the way it actually fights and its overall combat capabilities. Now, this is a very unique monster in comparison to the standard counterpart, and I'm going to continue reiterating that because the overall capabilities of the Coral Pukei Pukei is actually much better than the original version, meaning that all of the attacks that you will see with the Coral Pukei Pukei are attacks that you will never see from the original version, because the original version just can't do it. It just can't do it. So overall, I think when it comes to the combat capabilities and attack patterns, the Coral Pukei Pukei is the most well done out of the 3 introductory subspecies in Monster Hunter World Iceborne so far. So first up, let's talk about the most basic attack. So it has the basic spit attack that the original Pukei Pukei has, it has the tail whip attack, it has the tackle attacks, and of course it also has the tongue whip. Now, much like that of the original Pukei Pukei, the Coral Pukei Pukei itself will also start searching for food mid-combat in order to maintain its elemental capabilities. In this case scenario, it will start to look for a source of water. So whether that be bright moss, water moss, or the gelatin within the Coral Highlands, the Coral Pukei Pukei will go to these places in order to maintain its water capabilities. Now, shifting from that, when the Coral Pukei Pukei actually has water stored in its body, it can attack you in a plethora of different ways. The more basic ways is basically spitting a ball of water at you, so it's very similar to that of the original Pukei Pukei when it spits a ball of poison at you. Now, when it comes to the more unique attack patterns, these comes in many different forms. The most basic way that it does this is by spraying you with water using its tail. By using its tail, it can use it as kind of like a fire hose and spray you with water in many different ways. First up, it can use it in a straight line as it's shaking its tail, and then it will aim it towards the players. The second way is by aiming it towards the players and then slowly angling it at either left or the right direction. So depending on which way the Coral Pukei Pukei is aiming, it could spray it towards the left or towards the right. So this is one of those attacks that has multiple directions, so do watch out for it. The other way that the Coral Pukei Pukei can use its tail as a fire hose is basically using its body kind of like a fire hydrant, in that it will go to the gelatin area of the coral highlands and then it would shove its head in a comedic fashion into that gelatin, and then as it's drinking that water from the gelatin, it will start to spray you with the water using its tail. Now this is one of those attacks that can actually change directions depending on the Coral Pukei Pukei's discretion, and alongside this, the Coral Pukei Pukei can decide on how long it takes before it actually stops using it. So this is not only a very comic attack because of the fact that it shoves its head straight into that jelly just to get some drink, it will also start to spray you in a very unique manner, and it can actually change the direction in which the Coral Pukei Pukei is spraying. So this is one of those attacks that you really need to look out for when you're in this area, because of the fact that not only is the Coral Pukei Pukei capable of changing the direction of the way it attacks, but it also deals a heavy amount of damage. So it is a heavy damage dealing attack, so do watch out for it. Now, the other way that the Coral Pukei Pukei can actually expel water from its body is by spraying it using its mouth into a stream-like attack. So it comes in two forms. The first stream-like attack is basically, it's just a basic stream. So it's a straight line beam coming from its mouth towards a specific direction that it's facing at. The other way that it does this is basically executing the exact same attack. So it attacks in a straight line, but then as it's doing that, it slowly splits the beam either left or right, forming a V shape. So that is a very unique attack in my personal opinion, because there's no other monster that's capable of splitting a stream of water mid-breath attack like the Coral Pukei Pukei. Now, there are other monsters that are capable of spraying you with a stream of a breath attack, but no monster, at least as far as I know, is capable of splitting that stream attack mid-animation. So the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is the only monster so far that's capable of doing a basic stream attack and then all of a sudden splitting it in half in order to cover more ground. So overall, it's a very unique attack. Now, the other way that the Coral Pukei Pukei attacks you with water is by attacking you with a water bomb. Now, for those of you who have fought the Rathalos, you'll all know at this point that the Rathalos has this attack where it basically spits a huge ball of fire at you as it's leaping backwards. The Coral Pukei Pukei has the exact same thing. However, instead of a fireball, of course, it instead has a huge water bomb. And much like that of the Rathalos, this can deal a huge amount of damage to the players, and because it's a water-based attack, it can cause water blight. Now finally, the Coral Pukei Pukei itself has a unique attack that I personally like to call the Super Soaker attack. Now, the reason I call it the Super Soaker attack is because of the fact that the Coral Pukei Pukei itself will not stop spraying water across the battlefield until it lands on the ground. So this is indicated first and foremost with the Coral Pukei Pukei leaping upwards, and as it's leaping into the air, it's spraying the ground with water. Now, as it finishes this particular animation, it will start spraying directly below it, afterwards with water, and then as it's spraying directly below it, it will start to swing its tail in a circular motion. Now, as it's doing that circular motion, it gains more and more momentum, meaning that the tail will start to swing further and further away, covering more ground where the water is being sprayed at, until eventually the whole body of the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is rotating as it's slowly going towards the ground. And when that happens, the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is now covering so much ground when it comes to it spraying its water that it becomes much harder to actually avoid this attack when you're further away from the Coral Pukei Pukei. So this is one of those attacks that you really need to watch out for, because this is one of those attacks that the Coral Pukei Pukei can deal so much damage to you, and not only that, it can do it in rapid succession. So it's not a super move per se, but with the way it's been animated and the way it actually works. It does feel like a super move. So this is something that the Coral Pukei Pukei has that neither the Viper Tobikidachi nor the Nightshade Palumu has. It has a move that feels like a super move, but it isn't. So definitely something to look out for when you're fighting this monster, and it makes it such a really unique fight. Now overall, as you can see, the Coral Pukei Pukei is an amazingly designed subspecies. Not only does it meet the criteria that most subspecies meet, but Capcom themselves actually designed the Coral Pukei Pukei to be so unique in comparison to the original version that it doesn't actually feel like you're fighting a Pukei Pukei anymore. It feels like you're fighting a completely different monster. Now, the Coral Pukei Pukei itself is a monster that we get to see in the end game as well, meaning that we get to fight it in the Guiding Lands, so we can continue to enjoy fighting this particular monster and get to enjoy the unique movements and attack patterns that it has in the end game as well. Now, I'm not quite sure if this is true, but according to some people that I've spoken to, in the Guiding Lands itself, certain monsters get amplified stats. Now, again, I don't know if this is true, but if this is the case scenario, then the Coral Pukei Pukei actually benefits from that as well, because it has much stronger attacks in comparison to the Coral Pukei Pukeis in the Coral Highlands, for example. So as you can see, Capcom themselves really designed this particular monster to be something of a threat, not only during the beginning of the gameplay that we have, but also at the end game as well. So when you fight this monster, especially its tempered form in the end game as well, it does feel like a genuine threat, and it continues to do so when you're fighting this monster in the Guiding Lands. Now that is pretty much it for me for this video. In my next video, I'm going to be talking about the next monster that we get introduced to in Monster Hunter World Iceborne, as well as the very first veteran monster that we get introduced to with this particular expansion, and that is none other than the Barioth itself. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this video, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.